Good evening once again. Day 1246 of the Trump administration, 138 days to go until the presidential election. And Donald Trump is about to relaunch his campaign for re-election on the defensive by presiding in the COVID-19 era over an event that defines a public health risk. More on that later. The nation, of course, still in the grips of a pandemic. A former White House official is telling highly unflattering tales about his former boss. Two big Supreme Court cases have gone against Trump just this week, and issues of policing and race still very much on the front burner in this country in terms of public opinion. Tonight, in a streaming interview with his eldest son, Trump took a swipe at Joe Biden.
Well, he had a long time to do a lot of things, and he didn't, and he's certainly not in condition to do it now. He is not equipped to do it.
A Fox News poll out just this evening has Biden widening his lead on Trump 50 to 38. That compares to 48 to 40 a month back. Proviso, it's a national poll. We have some state-by-state polling to show you later on in the broadcast as well. Today, in a surprise ruling with political implications, as we mentioned, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled against Trump's campaign promise to immediately end the DACA program, protecting people who were brought to the U.S. as children. It was the second setback this week for the White House. On Monday, the court ruled gay and transgender workers are indeed protected by civil rights law. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer celebrated the DACA decision in the emotion of the moment, live on the Senate floor.
The decision's amazing. I am so happy. These kids, their families, I feel for them. And I think all of America does.
Trump had a very different opinion, asking on social media, quote, "Do you get the impression that the Supreme Court doesn't like me?" Later, he added, "We need new justices on the Supreme Court." And he promised to soon release a new list of conservative Supreme Court justice nominees. Trump's also pursuing his escalating legal battle to try to keep former National Security Advisor John Bolton's new book from being published, even though, and we have to stress this, a number of people already have the book before them, have read it and reviewed it. A federal judge hears arguments on the case tomorrow. Bolton wrote about his 17-month tenure in the Trump inner circle, and he kept up the attacks in another excerpt from his interview with ABC News.
I don't think he's fit for office. I don't think he has the competence to carry out the job. There really isn't any guiding principle that I was able to discern other than what's good for Donald Trump's reelection.
John Bolton in his interview with Martha Raddatz. Trump contends Bolton's book is, quote, "a compilation of lies and made-up stories, all intended to make me look bad." This afternoon, the president retweeted this mashup of Bolton praising Trump.
President Trump accomplished what other leaders have repeatedly promised but consistently failed to deliver.
He looks out after the best interest of the American people. They're the ones who elected him. They're the ones he's responsible to.
And his administration will deliver. I am confident.
He's not going to make the same mistakes that President Obama made.
Of course, praising the president is a condition of employment, and indeed tonight, in an updated interview, John Bolton fired back.
I think it's unbecoming of the office of president. I think it degrades the political civil discourse in our country, and I'm just not going to respond to it.
Trump is now just 2 days away from his campaign rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma, notably a city and state, both in the midst of a dramatic spike upwards. NBC News reporting Oklahoma far surpassed its record for newly reported coronavirus cases in a single day today. Today was the highest daily count since the start of the pandemic. Tomorrow, the state's Supreme Court is expected to rule on a request that the Bank of Oklahoma Arena require social distancing and face masks for attendance at the rally. The arena has always also requested the Trump campaign provide a written health and safety plan. At the White House this afternoon, Trump and the governor of Oklahoma tried to signal everything's fine here, everything's under control ahead of Saturday's big event.
We're sheltering individuals at the highest risk. If you look at really high-risk individuals, we are really watching them and we're taking care of them. And we know what the high risk means, but largely it means older people, especially older people, senior citizens.
We had an uptick in the number of cases, and so the media tries to talk about that. But we knew we were going to have an increase a little bit because we're 56 days into reopening. We have to learn how to be safe and how to have to move on.
Trump continued to put a spin on the pandemic during a wide-ranging interview with the Wall Street Journal. Quote, asked if he would be fine with Ivanka Trump, his eldest daughter, and a senior White House advisor sitting in the crowded audience inside the arena. He said he would. First of all, she's young, he said, adding that elderly Americans were more likely to become severely ill or die from the disease. He's also quoted as saying, testing for COVID-19 was overrated and allowed for the possibility that some Americans wore facial coverings not as a preventative measure, but as a way to signal disapproval of him. White House Coronavirus Task Force has been largely silent, AWOL, out of public view for the past 52 days as states grapple with rising infections in the midst of reopenings. Yet we did get this from Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was asked about all the mixed messaging these days during a podcast.
One of the problems we face in the United States is that, unfortunately, there is a combination of an anti-science bias. They just don't believe science and they don't believe authority. So when they see someone up in the White House, which has a air of authority to it, who's talking about science, that there are some people who just don't believe that. And that's unfortunate because, you know, science is truth.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.